Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight you're going to be hearing the second part of the conversation with Wren Collier and Jeff Ritzmann as we talk about belief as a possible gateway for this type of paranormal phenomena to enter our world, aka that it may need us in a way to manifest, not just that it manifests as what we think it might be. Of course, if you're a patron, you've already heard this part. Upcoming, I have Grant Cameron, yes. Let me try and talk again. Grant Cameron on next week. And the week after that, I should have Jack Brewer, finally. And that should be one hell of a conversation as well. I want to throw a shout out to Drew, who gave us a very generous donation this week. And, of course, if you want to become a patron, it's $3 a month, and you get extra stuff throughout the month. I have some giveaways I'm going to be having coming up for patrons, and I might add another level for some special stuff. We'll see. There is merch on the page. I hardly ever mention this. You can get shirts with Jeff Ritzmann's Men in Black design, and I will have Timothy Renner's Tarot Man and stuff up sometime soon. And you can get it on shirts and cell phone cases and all kinds of stuff. And of course, for everything Where Did the Road Go related, go to www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. We did change around the page a little bit. I'm working on fixing some of the tiny glitchiness here and there. So if you find something that's not working, please let me know. You can email me, you can drop me a line on Facebook or in the Facebook group, or probably the easiest way is to just click on the little talk bubble on the lower right of the website and send me a quick message and let me know what's not working, and I will get it worked out and fixed as soon as possible. All right, without any further ado, here's the second part of the conversation with Wren and Jeff. All right, so I welcome back Wren and Jeff Ritzmann as we do part two of this conversation on, I'm not even sure exactly what to call this conversation, to be honest with you. I mean, we're talking about the way this stuff can, so we started off with some of the theories of this stuff being like having belief as a gateway, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. And we've kind of gone a little all over, but I guess belief is probably the key thing that we've been talking about, like what you believe about it and how that affects the phenomena in general, regardless of what you're talking about, whether it be UFOs or ghosts or whatever. Mm-hmm. And even psychedelic experience that falls into as well. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that the last things we were talking about, what it made me think of was the not Men in Black, but the Black-Eyed Kids. Because Wren, you were talking about these things feeding off of fear, and the Black-Eyed Kids are one of the few paranormal things that seems to have nothing really potentially positive about it, I guess you could say. You know, there aren't Black-Eyed Kid reports where people say, "Oh, I feel enlightened after experiencing black-eyed children." You know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Stuff like the Black-Eyed Kids too even tie back into what we were talking about previously about when did that start? Because like I don't feel like there are maybe analogs in the past to that experience, but it seems like a relatively new phenomena. And like what sort of societal triggers have created this context in which people see these black-eyed children?
Yeah. Well, it also might be that they're not labeled as black-eyed children in older encounters. Mm-hmm. I forget who was talking about this. It might have been David Weatherly. But someone was talking about how if you had a black-eyed kid experience in 1900, it's more likely to be called a demon. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be labeled as a black-eyed kid.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like how much pop culture influences that, because
yes,
we were talking before the show. I brought up the show Supernatural, and in that show, all of the demons have completely black eyes, like black sclera and black irises, and that show's been around for like almost 10 years now. So I think it's interesting that I only started hearing about these things sort of within that pop culture context.
Yeah. But again, like I said, though, I think the encounters were there.
Yeah.
It's just that they were not labeled black-eyed children.
Or do you think that people were seeing something different, and that the phenomena has adapted itself to the like cultural landscape that we're
Well,
currently under?
that's always possible too. I mean, it holds a lot in common with Men in Black encounters. It holds a
Mhm.
lot in common with vampire encounters.
Yeah, I was thinking about the vampire thing earlier before the show too, because what we were talking about previously too, the idea that these things feed are where they're prey basically. That idea is as old as things like vampires or incubi or succubi.
Mhm.
Um, and the actual overarching narrative of these experiences seems to follow that thread, in that some kind of creature of the night assaults people in their most vulnerable state, and then feeds off of their suffering or their fear. Um, and I think that's something that's as old as mythology itself. I mean, that goes all the way back to like the Lamia and um, all the way back to Mesopotamia.
True, true. But it's like, when we deal with UFOs, obviously there's the positive and negative experiences. I wonder why some of them are just negative. Again, Men in Black fall into that category too, regardless of what they are. There's no positive Men in Black encounters. It's not like, oh, the Men in Black came by and helped me.
Well, at the risk of sounding woo, sometimes I do honestly wonder if there are just different entities. There are like different classes of them, or different. It's not all just one type of intelligence that's communicating with us. I mean, I remember we were talking about psychedelics before. The last time I dropped acid, I remember thinking, like, what if this is a very acid thought, but it's like, what if our lives? What if we're like caterpillars, and then like death is basically us, uh, metamorphizing into a butterfly. And then
Right.
the next thought I immediately had was, well, if we're butterflies, what if there are spiders? You know,
And
like,
that's where I was like at the last show. That's where I was. That was the reminder of my
mhm,
of my thought with that was, you know, especially when you're talking about occult practices and whatnot.
mhm,
There is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you probably have a lot more experience in that department than I do. From every book that I read about practical working,
mhm,
there comes this portion where the author will tell you, now I'm telling you these incantations, these spells, these recipes, if you will, for
mhm,
affecting reality, so on and so forth. But there will be a period where you will be tested. There's a portion where something you will feel something push back on you to say, how badly do you want this?
mhm,
Um, I read that in just about every book that I read. I saw something akin to that. It's almost like a keymaster type thing. If you want in, you got to get past the bouncer.
mhm,
And and I've often said, when it comes to the alien thing uh, or even the disembodied whatever that people would encounter in the dark or the light or wherever, if it's of this, I hate to go back to my catchword, the trickster type thing, but the trickster would imply that there is something that's being protected here. There's some gateway that's being manned or sentineled against people coming through. So in other words, the trickster is the magician who shows you all the shiny coins and then they all vanish and you're left with nothing. Um, and I've always said to audiences before, I wonder uh, what they are protecting. What is it protecting? It seems like it's standing watch over something. It seems like it's being deliberately fearful at times, just to be fearful. It seems to speak in cryptic riddles that nobody can quite understand.
mhm,
Um, all of these things. And I've said before that what if it's basically a protector of what we've alluded to here? Like it's an afterlife type thing. They are guardians of what happens to us after we die. And if that's the case, um, is that the reason for um, is that akin to the occult practice? Are they the how bad do you want it guys? Are they the guys that you have to? And you mentioned, that you saw these dogs and you shooed them away. I've had other people. In fact, on the last show that I hosted, I had a woman who talked about this entity that would come to her in the middle of the night, wake her up, and it was inherently like a Grim Reaper type looking thing. And at a certain point, she rose up out of the bed and says, "I know you're not real. I know you can't hurt me, so just go away." She got mad and it dissipated. It's like, yeah, you pass that threshold, you defeat the beast. Now you go on to whatever else is happening. Is it another ruse? Is it another facade that you have to get past? Or is it a series of those? Or is there only one? I have no idea. I'm just throwing that out there that's an interesting tangent that you see in occult practices. And you also see in this kind of thing in this symbolic kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, in the occult context, there's a name for that, and it is literally the dweller on the threshold. In a literal sense, it is literally like a gatekeeper to further knowledge and further, like, it's sort of it's your your red pill, basically.
Right.
It's like you have to get past it to see how far the rabbit hole goes, and if you can't get past it, well, then you are fated to live out the rest of your life normally, which for some people might be a blessing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like what you mentioned. When you start investigating these things, you start doing these things, you create this feedback loop. And at some point, you are confronted with something that you can no longer ignore. And you have to make a decision. Do I keep moving forward or do I just shut this down? I mean, that's the decision that Al Bender had to make. And he chose to live a normal life. And that's entirely up to the person. I'm not going to judge anyone who decides that they want to live a normal life and not delve into these things.
Right.
That's not me. I'm willing and have decided to delve further into it.
Right.
But I mean, you're right. I mean, that's something that appears to people, and it appears to people even outside of the occult context. And in a metaphorical sense, in a lot of ways, it again is a manifestation of your own anxieties. You're kind of looking at yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's your self-doubt. It's you thinking, am I really prepared to go forward with this? Do I really have what it takes? And, just like in life, if you are overwhelmed by your own self-doubt, you'll never move forward as a person or grow.
Yeah, but these in a lot of cases, these beings, whatever form they may take, for instance, in my case, which I mentioned last time about the figure standing beside the bed, couldn't quite figure out what it was. It was almost like this thing was literally tricking me. I knew full well what I was looking at, and yet could not make up my mind what I was looking at. My wife put it best when my friend that night at dinner said, "Well, how to get in the house?" This is the first thing that people who aren't really like up on this stuff. That's the first thing they ask. Well, how would something like that get in the house? And I said, what are you talking about? How does it get in the house? It's in the house. Yeah. And then at some point he said, how could you not know what it was? And my wife, God bless her, says, it does something to you. That was just as plainly as you could put it. And I thought that was a brilliant statement. It does something to you. And so, to me, it almost seems like you say, the guardian of the threshold, the trickster is associated with thresholds. I mean, this is typical, not just metaphorically. Plenty of things seen in doorways, plenty of things seen in bathrooms, and all these things being liminal thresholds. Is it the thing that presents itself as, you say, manipulative? It will eat your soul. That could be possibly the worst thing I could think of. Would be my soul to be eaten.
Right.
The ultimate death. So something like that is inherently fearful for a reason. It is protecting. It is holding all the keys. Who's going to be the one to go, I'm not buying it?
Yeah. Who's going to call the bluff and be like, you can't do that? Like,
I think Whitley did in a way, like, I'm not buying that. That's not what you look like. But he was going for the appearance. The appearance is not what you look like. It's a puzzle box. It's this and it's that and it's this and that.
Well, you bring up the Whitley thing. I mean, that's what I think is fascinating about about his experiences, because he mentions the Nox and how at one point he is faced with this dweller in the threshold moment. I think he talks about it in Transformation, about
Yes.
how
Yeah, I
he's
think so.
invited outside. He knows that if he goes outside, then he's
That's
going to go with them. Like, he's going to pass the threshold.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do it, and he's racked with like guilt about it. Like, afterwards, he's like, sort of like, it seems like he's lamenting the fact, like he's lamenting his own like cowardice at not just doing it. And I always thought that was fascinating. He's a very complex character in that regard, because it's sort of amazing to me still that he still had experiences after that. Because at least in my context, in my worldview, I would think that if you don't heed the call, then it leaves you alone at that point.
I think that's probably true. I mean, I look at that almost akin to, I'm sure you've heard McKenna talk about his UFO experience in La Chorrera. I mean, he said, when it was coming, I was scared to death. This thing is literally going to take me. And then as it passed him by and flew away, he was disappointed.
Or John Lennon chasing after the UFO and saying, "Take me with you."
Exactly. I mean, it's that kind of thing. But it's there. You are presented with this horrifying aspect of the loss of control, which again goes kind of to my cohort Jeremy Vaney talking about when I'm talking with Soraya about the Kundalini thing. There's this aspect of just taking your hands off the bar. You're letting go. You're letting go. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and that's it. There is that notion of letting go, surrendering. For years, I talked about. I think the first podcast I ever hosted, I said I'm going to try to do a live broadcast from the hill, in which I've had many weird encounters with craft of one kind or another, like literally feet from where my wife and I had a very significant experience at one point. And I know, if I went there and I sat alone in that field, it would come. Whatever it would be, I don't know. Something would come. Now it's in my backyard. Now it's a crystal laying on the backyard. I know, if I took that and I did it again, it would come back. So when I'm ready, I think I might be good to go. My only aspect with having someone come to the house, which a lot of people said, I don't believe you. I don't. Great. You have an open invitation. Email me. My email's available. Email me. Make arrangements. You can come here. You can stay at my house, but you're going to put that crystal to your forehead, and then you're going to go to bed in the dark, and then you're going to tell me what happens. And I'm not sure I'm staying here. I think I might sleep outside that night. I don't know. But
you mentioned the idea of them being fishers. They're just dangling this bait in front of you.
Oh, it's the dangling carrot. Yeah.
This also, and I completely forgot to bring this up, it also puts me in mind of, if I'm not mistaken, Carlos Castaneda. In his work, they would talk about being, and I think it was a dragon, that at death you're swallowed by a dragon, but the Nagul would be the one who avoids the dragon at death. Like you're devoured by the dragon, and you're gone. But if you learn the ways of the warrior, you can avoid the dragon and avoid basically being recycled. And there's a path of left-hand Buddhism and Tantra that's like that as well, where you develop the abilities that normally you would repress, that come naturally from stages of enlightenment. But instead of achieving nirvana, you stop short of it, because nirvana is annihilation. And you don't reject those abilities, you actually utilize them to stay yourself.
Yeah, that narrative of the cycle of death and rebirth, of the recycling of souls into new bodies, is something that you see present throughout, I think, most cultures. I mean, especially the Buddha and the Carlos Castaneda thing. I think it's the idea is that you can basically maintain your ego after death instead of being recycled and having to start all over again. And that's also the idea of escaping samsara in Buddhism. The idea of being able to escape the wheel of death and rebirth, being able to move beyond that. And even Robert Monroe talks about, I mean, literally talks about it in these kind of terms at Far Journeys, where he observes the sort of wheel of souls that exist around the earth that are constantly cycling in and out. And the idea is that these non-human entities from other places come in and decide to live as humans for a while. And some of them live a bunch of lives and then they exit, they leave and go off wherever with all this knowledge that they've obtained or experiences that they've been able to live, because these beings aren't physical, so they can't experience physical reality except through the context of like a physical being. But some of them get stuck, they forget where they came from, and they sort of just get stuck in that cycle, forever being recycled over and over again, and producing this emotional energy.
It's possible we've all forgotten where we came from.
Yeah.
Well, and here's a question, both for everybody listening and for you two, because I don't think I've ever asked Sarai this either. How many times have you been told by anybody the words, "You're an old soul"?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, plenty.
Yeah.
Like, what is that about?
There is a sense there. That's I think one of those things that you can sense in someone.
See, I don't like that. I don't like that.
I don't think it's something you can put your finger on, though.
Well, it's something, I mean, I've talked about this before too. I don't think things like physical memories, like your actual memories of each life, carry over. Because I think that is something that's probably related to the physical structure of your brain, like it's a chemical thing. But that you sort of, I guess, take the impressions, the parts of your personality or the parts of your experiences that aren't necessarily tangible or quantifiable in terms of memory. You sort of take those things with you. And at least in Monroe's idea, it was like a sort of like a school. I mean, even Whitley talks about this, right? Like that the earth is sort of like a school in which souls are taught things and they sort of cycle in and out, learning as they go.
Yeah, and see, that's see, I used to get that all the time,
Mm-hmm.
like especially when I would go to MUFON meetings, or I would go to the MUFON symposiums, or an X conference. Like literally strangers would come up to me in a crowd and say, do you realize how old you are? And I'd be like, what are you talking? Yeah, of course I know how old I am. Here's my license. I can, like, I got it a lot in the bars, the X conference. Do you know how? I said, yeah, I'm over 21. I assure you. Oh no, that's not what I'm going to this big spiel about it. And this one woman, I will never forget it. At the local MUFON meeting, I didn't know her from Adam. It was probably the second time I had gone. And she walked up to me and said that. And she said, you don't have to keep coming back here. And when she did, I cannot explain my reaction, but I literally started to waffle like a child. I mean, I was, and I had no idea where it was coming from, which scared me, to be honest with you. And that coupled with the notion that I have this recurring dream, I've had it for lots of years, that I'm in high school and that I'm in a particular English class in my senior year, and I can't get out of school. And I'm telling all my friends, we graduated like 20, 30 years ago. Like, what are we doing here? And I keep wandering out of the class and the teacher's yelling at me and I'm wandering the halls and I cannot find the exit. And that bothers me because I'm like, well, what is it that I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And so I like the notion of losing, like you're saying, losing the memory part of you after death. My answer to that is, aren't memories what make up your personality, and that who makes you, your experiences? So who am I if I'm not these things?
I would question whether or not we lose our memories, for the very reason that I'm not sure memories are stored in the brain exactly. I think they may be stored sort of in our energy field, and that might be what survives. Like, they may not be quite, like, there may be a difference between long-term, short-term memories and what kind of memories retain. but I feel like the ability to pick up information from somebody,
Mhm.
to be able to read somebody, implies that that stuff is in an energy field, not in the physical brain.
I sort of see it in the terms of are you guys familiar with like what metadata is?
Yeah.
So I
But
sort
tell
of
tell people who aren't.
okay, so like if say you take a picture, right? Like the data of the picture is the picture itself, but your camera stores all sort of metadata about the picture. So things like where it was taken, geolocation information, like what ISO speed you used, the light levels, things like that. Um, it's and you know it recently it's been a hot thing because of the NSA phone scandal where they're storing metadata of phone calls where basically they're not storing what number was called, uh, but they're storing like information like how long the call was or things like that. And the way I sort of look at it is maybe memory, like your actual physical sort of memories. Like I remember picking an apple out of an apple tree when I was 11 years old. That is sort of the data, but the metadata is the feeling I had picking that apple out of the tree. The what it did to me as a person, the sort of intangible elements of it that aren't the explicit memory itself, but the ways it shaped me. And I feel like that is what's carried over after death, not the memory itself, but the metadata of the memory, and that is what creates that cycle of improvement.
Oh, that's reasonable.
There it is. We figured it out. Thanks, Red.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
I feel like the energy fields around us without that, it's harder to explain anything psychic. Because
Yeah.
if you say, okay, this person, because I've had the experience of picking up other people's thoughts, not everyone, but every once in a while I can do it, and I'm dead on accurate when it happens. It sounds like a voice in my head. It sounds like they're saying something to me, and they're not. And I'm sure a lot of people have had that experience before.
Yep.
And if memories are nothing more than a physical experience, then that doesn't make sense. Like you shouldn't be able to do that if they're just hardwired into the brain. They would have to exist in some state outside of the brain in order to be picked up from an external entity.
Well, I guess what I would say, like, let's say you're, because I'm firmly in the same camp too. I believe in psi phenomena. I've experienced it myself. I don't doubt it in the least. But like, let's say you pick up an impression of somebody, like you know something about them. You know that they just feel untrustworthy, or you feel like you can trust them, like without knowing anything about that person. That's kind of what I mean. Like you're pulling that in a sort of metadata context from them, and that's I think what exists in that sort of energy field, or that you're just talking about. Um, it's less that you're reading someone's memories, but you're picking up the subtle aspects of them that are carried over, I believe. But it's just an idea.
Yeah. No,
I
definitely.
find it interesting that you, and I had the same thing with my son when he was probably 5 years old, and we were driving over to the mall, and I had thought about buying him these tiny little cars called penny racers that he used to play with at my in-laws' house all the time. I thought I should buy him his own, and he said, "Yeah, Dad, I'd love that." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I'd love them, the penny racers. I'd love to get some." I said, "I didn't say that out loud. Did I say that out loud?" I looked at my wife. She's like, "No, you didn't say anything." So
that sort of thing happens all the time between, I think, people who are close emotionally, who share some sort of emotional connection. I mean, even the word telepathy comes from literally like pathos at a distance, telepathos.
Yeah, but I've had the thing is about that is like it's the voice, and I've asked Cody about that, not so terribly long ago. It's like, yeah, I totally remember that. I heard you say it. I said, but I didn't say it. He goes, I know, but I heard you. Soraya says he hears. Well, one particular lady used to, she used to think he'd hear the word. And to me, like the telepathy from this phenomena, whatever the hell it is not that all the time. Like sometimes it is that weird kind of not audible but audible, but a lot of times it's visual, and there is literally no mistaking what is being said. And when that's what struck me so much about when McKenna described that telepathy is not hearing what someone says, it's seeing what they mean.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. That
and
is
I thought
exactly
that
what
is
Lauren. Yeah.
so brilliant that he knows that,
Mhm.
because I have no other way to explain that.
He is 100% of the money on that, because that is exactly what Lauren McIntyre describes in Amazon Beaming when he is having telepathic conversations with an Amazonian shaman of the Mayorina tribe. Um, they don't share a common language. There's no way that they would be able to, use verbal language to talk to each other, even telepathically, but they still talk telepathically with each other. And Lauren speculates that he's not necessarily hearing words, he's experiencing what those words would cause a reaction in him of, like,
It's knowing is how I've always,
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know, it kind of that's how I've kind of described it. It's like you just simply know, and
Mhm.
there isn't like an argument, and it's not like you can misunderstand it.
Yeah, it's like this pre-verbal. I mean, my theory on this is that it's a pre-verbal communication method that probably every animal on Earth has the ability to do once you reach a certain level of like neural complexity, and that it was probably the primary way humans communicated with each other before the advent of language. Which humans as we know them, like Homo erectus probably or Homo sapiens probably always had language, but I'm talking about like pre-Homo sapiens, like
Right.
like Australopithecus, that sort of thing. Like, it was probably the way we communicated before we had words to communicate with. And one of the reasons I think it is an ability that we lose as we get older and only manifests in these sort of anecdotal encounters is because, simply put, language is easier. Like, it's easier just to tell someone something
Well, in a
than,
mass communication way, certainly. You know.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, how would you, because the telepathic channel, I think, is like emotional in nature. Like, how would you express complex topics, like sociological topics or philosophical concepts, through this, sublingual method? Um, it's interesting, but it's something I think that we lose simply because of language itself. Language simply overrides the need to use it, and it atrophies.
Well, I think if nature is any signal to that sort of thing, because we are of nature after all,
Mhm.
uh, look at what's being written about these days about trees,
Mhm.
and the fact
Yeah.
that trees communicate with each other and tell
Yeah.
each other what not to do. It's very slow, which is really Lord of the Rings-ish to me.
Mhm.
But you know, but they are communicating. The certain ones, like the Rush song, could not be more apropos here.
Mhm.
Uh, certain trees are parasitic, and they know they are, and so they'll choke them out, or they'll send word out to another tree that doesn't like this weed, and they will come and consume the weed.
Yeah.
I mean,
They
if there's
communicate. They'd let each other know about droughts and
exactly, I
bug
need help.
attacks and that
You
sort of thing.
know, yeah, exactly. So all of that seems to be really hold sway with all of the latent stuff that you hear going on with us.
Mhm. I mean, for sure,
Hmm.
even anecdotally, like my experience with this is that on multiple occasions, I'll start humming a song. It just pops in my head. I don't know where. Just like, oh, I'll just start humming this song, and my girlfriend will be like, "I was just thinking about that song. Like, why did you start humming it?" I'm like, "I don't know. It just popped in my head."
Yeah.
Hmm. There's
Ponderous, man.
no, it's
Ponder.
ponderous, and I've had such an array of experiences with stuff like this. I'm trying to
Mhm.
pick one out, but I'm not sure that I can really isolate one at the moment.
Well, something I wonder. I mean, to bring it back to the belief topic, um, I've said before, and I've had this hunch that these entities, if we think about them in a literal sense, um, sort of use those same channels, that same bandwidth to communicate with us. That's why you hear these stories of like telepathic communication and that sort of thing. But that they're so foreign and alien, in the truest sense of the word, that they can't communicate with us with like language as we understand it, because they
Right.
don't have any context for that. So they build a narrative drawing from our fears, our anxieties, our hopes, our dreams, and the pop culture, landscape that we live in order to present metaphors and context that we can understand, and therefore create a communication channel where information can be sent both ways.
Andrew Collins' idea of them being plasma intelligences postulated that when we get close enough to them, a bubble reality is created where we can actually communicate, similar to what you're saying there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a certain, and I think this ties into belief in like the occult and stuff too. It's one of the biggest things about occult practices is that belief is a strong component of it. You need to believe that it's, that you're in what you're doing, and I think that that belief in something is sort of the like, I don't know, in like telecommunications terms, it's like the handshake that starts the conversation. Like you need to have that in order for it to fully manifest.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think
Maybe.
I think it's interesting when you say that a little while ago you had said something about multiple phenomena interacting and doing things here. I always think in terms of it's one phenomena, but it's there are several different components to it. There's an occult component. There's a spiritual component. There's a the more you give, the more you get component. There's all these things, and I think one of the last theories that I don't do theories anymore. Like I don't even think about them anymore. I used to sit around thinking of ways how I could tone this thing down. The last one that I thought about at any length or wrote about in any length was the notion of UFOs in general, like approaching it from the UFO angle. The aspect of a craft of some kind, and there are so many multitudes of different reported shapes and sizes and configurations, and they seem to change every time, almost staying just ahead of where we think we should be, or where we believe things are going to go. Multi-lobed craft are now a big thing, whereas back in the 50s it was flying saucers. And I might point out that during the 50s, one common component or common feature of a flying saucer was, big surprise, a fin. And so when you see all these things, and you hear the reports of people talking about the ecology, nuclear war, these warnings, these impending disasters, this all seems to be, for lack of a better way to put it, all surrounding and pertaining to the earth, care of the earth, dealing with the earth changes. So I thought one day, well, there's so many different configurations of this stuff. What if this is all communication from the earth? In other words, what if UFOs are made up of dust, dead birds, leaves? Several experiences that I've talked to have said that whatever they landed and walked onto in a conscious state was or felt alive to them. That it was not a craft of the way we think of craft. This thing felt sentient and alive, all on its own. And so I thought to myself, well, this is how these things disappear so quickly. They just simply dissipate. What we see as speeding away may be blowing away. And what it's conveying, or what this thing seems to be reaching a more fevered pitch than it as it goes through time. That is one thing that I think is true. It does have peaks and valleys, but over time, I think the awareness of this, the discussion of this, the outward discussion of experiences with this has gotten more and more prolific over time. As I said, peaks and valleys, according to what's going on in the world, and all, like you've mentioned, Ren, the response to strife and public struggle and all of that. That all fits in here.
Well,
it's
Jeff,
a birthing, like this is a birthing place. This is where we go out from. The UFO is suggesting these things. It is suggesting, get the hell out of here. I can't sustain you anymore. therefore we get the global warming, the earthquakes, the all of these things that are the result of a put upon planet that should have been
Right.
vacated many years ago. This sort of thing,
or at least not as populated as it is.
Well, yeah, and so could all of this stuff be a response from the Earth? I can't possibly have been the only person to ever say this.
Well,
not at
it's
there's something extremely interesting in the changing light at Sandover that you're going to get a kick out of, because and just as a note about this book, more than any other channeled text I think that I've ever come across, I trust the stuff in the changing light at Sandover more than any other, because it was written by a poet who had no interest in any of these things. This is all information given to him without an agenda. So here is what happens when he asks about the flying saucers. He's told, MM has asked about the saucers. They scout our greenhouse and seem to be of it. By greenhouse, he means Earth. And seem to be of it, for we do not know its limits. Forests and jungles attract them. They seem unoccupied. Think of atomically powered bees charged with, we believe, with the transfertilization of sense data. James Merrill asks, like, does that answer your question, my man? And then he says, they decide to be cheeky, and they're like, well, let me ask, is the moon made of green cheese? And he says, the moon, JM, is a monument to our failure. It's spun off from the stuff of our world in a puffball of blazing dust. And then he says, yeah, that old hypothesis, the moon, torn from the Earth's side. And he says, no. We made the moon. It was the crust. Rotation swept up and fused our debris into a haunting reminder. So these entities are telling these entities that are talking about how Earth is a greenhouse and they feed on the souls of humans, and that it's this giant power plant basically. They refer to the flying saucers as actually being of the Earth, just like you said. Like literally, they refer to them as like bees. They're like some sort of hive intelligence that literally is like a packet of data that the Earth has just created.
Yeah.
And like that's just a fascinating way of thinking about UFOs.
I believe Seth actually said that they were not physical in the sense that we think of it, that they were consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally what these guys are saying. Yeah.
Yeah. He said that they came from sort of another dimension, because he said that is the only thing that can travel between dimensions is consciousness. And he said the forms that you see them in are not what they are.
Mm-hmm. And to that point,
followed by, I'm actually kind of surprised you can see them.
Yeah, and following that point, he goes on a little while later, and he says, the entity says, but can you doubt that we have verified the UFOs on our screens? These reflect each smallest power source, being as yet so foreign to the density of world science. The saucers show up best in a realm of speculation. And then James Merrill says, a mirror world, dear 741. That's excellent, but your verification, while you yourselves remain unverified, you can't expect us, he's basically saying you can't expect us to believe this. We don't even know if you're real. And then he says, curious that you accept the cup and not the saucer. And he's talking about, because he used a teacup to do as a planchette for the Ouija board. So he says, but the cup, this is happening to us right now. This is, by definitions, half subjective. And then the spirit says, folie à deux, folie à 2 million. What difference? And he's like, yeah, basically the saucers exist in this realm of speculation, in this realm of consciousness that seems to be generated by the Earth itself, that's actually separate from these entities. It's interesting that the entities in the Change and Let It Sandover don't actually know what UFOs are. They're kind of like, I don't know, we think that they're this, but honestly, we don't really know.
I think it's interesting that it talks about that they exist in the realm of speculation, because that, to me, is one of the big hallmarks of finding them.
Yeah.
In finding them, one of the things that one must do is speculate endlessly and ponder endlessly. And as I said before, ask the questions that only you want to ask, but you would be kind of ashamed or afraid or embarrassed to say out loud. Mm-hmm. And that really is one of the bigger parts of going in that and out into that field. And and looking, but at the same time asking those questions. So they do in fact live in the realm of speculation, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
As far as being of the earth and all, I can see it, but do I? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if it's a productive thing to be asking at this point.
Well,
But
you're right to be
yeah,
doubtful.
oh yeah, absolutely. But by the same token, there are other parts to that don't even remotely fit that kind of plan. That don't even remotely, like, there are people experiencing all matter of different things pertaining to that. But again, the one constant is this thing of the earth. I mean, one can't deny that the crystal thing that happened to me, that's an earth thing. That's something
Exactly.
from, as you said, from the earth. It's almost like a key. I look at that like a key now. And somebody asked me the other day, well, what would have to happen for you to do that again? How would you have to be? And I said, I honestly don't know. I said, but it would take a lot. It would take a lot of I have not done psychedelics in my life, save for one time with a mushroom. It would be that kind of like, well, here it goes. And I had no idea. I had no idea what that would feel like bodily. I don't like bodily things. I don't like feeling weird. I don't like my arms not feeling like they're attached to the rest of me. I don't like that. Because that's a loss of control to me. And so I think in part that's what this stuff has tried to somewhat harshly teach me, is to let go of the notion that I have any toehold on reality whatsoever. That's been kind of like the overarching thought to me. And the fact that I've learned next to nothing about it, but volumes about me, that seems to be a constant too.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's what it needs. Like, in order to continue to reproduce and spread its sort of a mimetic virus, it needs to string you along. Like,
maybe, and maybe every once in a while it's got to give you a gold nugget for something. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. But at the same time, it also alienates people. It separates and segments people. So there's that aspect to it too. I mean, would the Earth do that? I don't know that the Earth would do that. But we have no idea. I mean, I think that the way I rationalize the part of the high strangeness, which is a whole nother thing we haven't even really talked about, which is this high strangeness aspect. Like, if it's the Earth, and the Earth, like we always say, she's really alive. It's not a ball of mud. It's a living thing, and it's probably conscious.
Right.
If you can take that, then you might take the fact of, does it really know how to communicate with the 3-pound universe in your head? Yeah, you're of it, but can it really communicate with you effectively? Or is it literally watching television or seeing images and going, yeah, that and that and that, and does this? No, okay, let me try this, let me try that, and it keeps trying these memes out, and that translates to just bizarreness.
Well, I mean, have you ever tried to communicate with one of your red blood cells?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Try to make sense out of an FM. Well, I shouldn't say this because certain paranormal groups do. Try to make sense of spinning an FM dial from one end to the other and trying to see if you can communicate with that. That's kind of how I look at this. Could it be that this thing is trying to talk to us, and yet we're just misinterpreting all over the place? And it's going, God damn it! Every time I try to talk to these people.
And if we are just cells in the Earth's body, it would literally be like us trying to communicate with ourselves. Like, there seems to be a way we can do it to a degree, but it happens on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
And that level is of symbolism and things like that. I had made a note at some point, just a thought that had crossed my mind that said, what if we're just the Earth's food digesting?
Wow, what a grim thought. But yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's kind of like, I mean, I just thought, like, how, if the Earth is conscious, how lonely must it be? You know,
Well, it has Mars and Venus and
stuck in sort of space. You've got all these conscious beings walking around on you that you can't communicate with or talk to. I mean, it would be like us trying to communicate with an ant.
yeah.
You know, like.
Yeah.
So you guys think about these deep things. You know what I ponder? I'll tell you what I ponder. Why are haunted houses built atop grave sites when the whole planet is a grave site?
Yeah, well, that's
like
true
what
too.
makes that so amazing?
Well, okay, so here's my theory on this. And it's not just haunted houses, but if you look at certain old graveyards, like I've been in a lot of graveyards, and some of them definitely have activity, and some of them I've never noticed the slightest bit of activity.
Mhm.
It's the newer ones I don't notice as much activity in, I've noticed. And what that has made me wonder is, in the olden days, if you're going to build a graveyard, you're going to pick a sacred spot to build a graveyard, as opposed to now where you're just going to pick wherever there's land.
Mhm.
So what if those sacred spots were sacred because they had activity?
Or what if they have activity because things are being drawn to it by this emotional energy?
Well,
that
that's
is
a
generated by
possibility
graveyards
too.
and grieving, and suffering.
But you would think that would happen everywhere.
That's true. Yeah.
So every graveyard would. Like, for instance, there's two graveyards in Ithaca. One is the Lakeview Cemetery. It's a very nice cemetery, overlooks the lake, as the name suggests.
Mhm.
I have never had an experience there any time I've gone there. But then there's the other one, which I think is just the Ithaca graveyard or whatever.
Mhm.
And so much stuff has happened there. And I've talked to other people who have had experiences there. So why would one be different than the other? Except, interestingly, the Ithaca one is also very liminal. It sits on a hill between uptown and Cornell, or downtown and Cornell.
Mhm.
It has water running through it.
That'll work.
It has a lot of little things that also and there's a Buddhist temple 2 blocks down, and the Buddhists consider this one of the most powerful areas on the planet.
Huh.
Yeah, and I mean, I was going to bring up the same thing. Graveyards in the past were probably put on places of, quote unquote power, or like rites of consecration were performed,
Well, that's
on
a
that area
possibility
too.
too.
Like certain, effectively occult practices, just wrapped in a different context, were performed
Yeah.
on that area.
Well, here's an interesting factoid. The church that I mentioned where I would sit in the field is across the street from where Lisa and I had our big experience when Cody was a baby, and all of that. So that was kind of what put me here.
Mhm.
On the eclipse day on Monday, I went to that church. I sat in that parking lot. I watched the eclipse from that parking lot. I was completely fine. It was daytime. When I left the eclipse parking lot, I went across the street down the site from Lisa and I having a pretty significant experience was to the left. To the right is a cemetery. And there's a historian that I used to rent a building from when I ran a guitar business down the bottom of the hill. And he knows everything about the historical area this is. He owns the oldest inn between Baltimore and York. So it's a historical landmark. He said, "Do you know why Weisberg Cemetery is where it is?" And I said, "No." So when there was trains and there was all of these, when they were building the railroad through here and all of that, there was a cemetery there, but it wasn't nearly as big, and it was pretty much a family cemetery. The reason that it got to be an everybody cemetery is because workers used to get hit building the railroad by train. Hobos got hit by train. Bums got hit by trains. They literally would pile these people in and cover them over.
Huh.
This is all within, I kid you not, stone's throw of each other. So I literally saw my first ghost at the rental property where I rented the shop. From up the hill is where Lisa and I had the experience, and the church is right across the street from that. All this stuff is within literally a quarter mile or less from each other.
Nice.
It's like this triangle of weird at that spot. and I'm certainly not the only person to ever talk about that kind of stuff. I mean, I've got friends up there that have said much the same thing, that they've seen weird things in the sky. They've also had ghost experiences there. All matter of weird stuff. Now, in that cemetery, I have not had anything. And I've been up there pretty late at dark taking photographs. Never had anything experience-wise. But there's graves up there that are hand carved from a single sheet of slate from about 1678 and forward. So there's some seriously old stuff up there. But all of these things are so close to each other, you can't imagine. And so I find that interesting, that it could be that this church was, or that cemetery was, a sacred site of some kind, recognized by somebody at some point, and you've got this phenomena interacting around the same general area.
Right.
Fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, is it that some places, the veil between here and there is a little thinner there? Is that what's going on? Is it, or is there something, Earth related there that causes that sort of thing to manifest more readily?
Or is there something there that affects our consciousness that makes us more aware of this stuff in those spots?
Yeah.
I can tell you that there are houses down the hill from the cemetery now that were built, I don't know, probably 20 years ago. But before those houses were built, I used to hunt with a friend of mine in those empty fields. And there was a couple points of trees that deer would frequent. And there was a big open field and then trees across the way, like a hedgerow. And we went out there. I remember my friend Ken would want to get out there at like 3 a.m, which I thought was absurd, to get in the trees and all of that. And we went out one morning and we sat together. Normally we'd part away and he'd go to one point of woods and I'd go to the other point. We stayed together. We were crouched down on the ground. It was just starting to get light. And I looked down right between he and I. And what is on the ground looks, for all intent and purposes, exactly what you would see in the sky as a star. It was white. It was on the ground. I pawed at it with my hands. We both did. We pawed at it. We dug with our hands for like 10 minutes, trying to figure out what it was and move it. If we could make it move, we could not get it to move. It was like it was there and it wasn't there. You never took your eyes off of it. You could block it out with your hands, but when you dug in and moved the earth, it wasn't there. It didn't move. With the morning light coming up, it gradually just faded away. What is that? What is that? These are like the most bizarre things that I've seen in that general area. What is that? I mean,
you mentioned the eclipse, and that was from when we're recording. That was last Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see the eclipse where we were. It was only a partial eclipse anyway. I've seen eclipses before, especially partial eclipses, so it really wasn't that big of a deal to me. But there's a bunch of liminal stuff going on with me right now, more so than usual. And the day of the eclipse, I actually didn't feel good. I just felt really drained and really out of it. And I kept, like, I'd get up and I'd be like, nope, I feel terrible. I'm going to lay back down. And at some point, it was like 6:30 at night. And I thought, I really need to get up. I got work I got to do. And I'm laying there, pretty much awake. And in my right ear, which is the ear that's laying on the pillow, I heard this voice literally go, "Come here."
Oh, Jesus.
And I laid there for a minute, and I then went, "Come where? What do you want me to do?" And I'm like looking around and nothing. I've had a lot of stuff moving in my rooms recently. Like, especially when I lay down to go to sleep, I'll hear stuff moving, but I can't figure out what it is. So that happened, and then I'm laying there thinking, why doesn't this stuff freak me out? Like, I'm not freaked out at all. I would just wish it made more sense, you know?
Yeah.
But that was the only thing that happened to me on the eclipse. I can't remember if it was the day before or day after the eclipse. I had a quick poltergeist thing. We were watching the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and all of a sudden, right near the finale, where, if you've seen it, Star-Lord's dad's like reforming, all of a sudden the sound is off. And I'm thinking, well, that's a weird choice to just make it silent there. And then it continued being silent, and I thought, oh man, is my DVD screwed up? And then we looked, and the sound on the stereo had turned itself all the way down very, very quickly.
Huh.
It's like, okay, great, rewind, turn the volume back up, and let's continue.
But you're in a liminal period in your life right now.
Right. So there's been a lot of weird little things, nothing major.
Right.
I mean, even the voice wasn't major. It was just, it's the only time I've heard a voice like that. Like the voice, if I hear a voice telling me something, it's usually one specific voice. I know it. I've heard it most of my life. This was not that voice.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that you're one of those trolling victims of this, because clearly you're more than that. But now
I'm inviting it, definitely.
Imagine you just being a guy. You know, you're an average Joe with an average life and an average wife, and that happens. You know, depending on what kind of personality you are, depending on how it grabs you, this is how this is how I've seen this stuff take root. You would pursue that. What was that? Then the next thing you know, you're reading about disembodied voices, and you're reading about poltergeist activity. And the more you read and the more you ponder and you see how it goes, it just builds to this fever pitch, and more and more and more and more. I mean, that seems completely typical to me as far as how this stuff does troll for people. And I don't know that the trolling is random either. I mean, I don't really have any statistics on that, but you know, it stands to reason that certain experiences for people are random.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people sort of just experience things sometimes out of the blue, and it's usually something. It sort of acts as a vector. Like I've posited this idea before, that these experiences act similar to viruses, and that a person will be in the woods and they'll have a Bigfoot encounter, or they'll just have rocks thrown at them or something like that, or hear wood knocks, and then they'll go home, and that activity will continue at home. Things will be thrown at their house, or they'll hear knocks on their walls, or things will be moving around inside their house. And it's almost, and some people are like, well, the Bigfoots followed me home, and now they're harassing my house. And I'm like, maybe you picked up something. Maybe you picked up a bug.
But here's the question and this is good that you're bringing this up, because this is something you said on the last show, and I'm like, I got to remember to say this. So I get what you're saying, but have you ever heard tell of anyone having an experience like that in the woods and blowing it off only to go home and have something like that happen? Because what you get 9 times out of 10 is, I think I heard something earlier in the woods. You don't get that. What you get is, yes, I heard these in the woods, and then I came home and it's in the house. There seems to be this, is someone predisposed? You have to grab it. I don't know that I can go with that it's caught like a virus, but I think it's either you grab that and you, again, if they came home wondering, pondering, what was that noise? What did I hear? What followed me? Then I can see tandem effects happening in the home.
Yeah, and that's an important aspect, because remember we were talking about encounter-prone personalities?
Exactly.
Yeah. Think about that encounter-prone personality as a person with a weakened immune system, effectively. Like, what if skepticism is basically an immune system against infection by this, these memes, and that by being more open or having an encounter-prone personality, you actually have lowered defenses against picking up these sort of things. And like you said, a person who just blows it off will probably not experience it again. That activity will not continue.
Because they'll go back to routine.
Yeah, but a person who starts investigating it, or can't shake it or get it out of their head, maybe it just grows inside them, and starts to gestate.
Yeah, and I think the crucial bit to remember there is that the one person who blows it off or says, well, I don't know what that was, whatever, let's go get lunch. They don't have that tandem stuff at home or whenever.
Exactly.
They fall into routine. They go back to normal life. The other person will not. They will harp on it. They will become fixated on it, which leads them into anti-structural behavior, which leads them to liminality, which leads to the floodgate opening. I mean, I think that's definitely something going on there.
And
Like, I
in
don't know
some
if I can bet
cases,
the farm on it, but I feel pretty strongly about it. Or I wouldn't write about it as much as I do. But
yeah,
yeah, I totally think that is something. The question is, what's the mechanism for that?
mhm.
And can that be somehow qualified? That's the big question for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to your, the research you did with Dr. Koch John and everything on in Project Core, like looking for the that type of person. Like, what are the risk factors, basically, for a person to basically catch these memes? And it's not even too. I don't think every person becomes a carrier signal either.
No.
But I think about like Jacques Vallée talking about Mr. X and the idea that some people they go completely off the reservation and it makes them into cult leaders and it makes them spread these ideas to other people. They become like typhoid Marys, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it only further reinforces those memes and spreads them further into the cultural ecosystem. And my idea here is that things like disinformation campaigns, things like I don't know, like cover up the whole, disclosure thing. Maybe it is because at some level, and I think even uh, it was either Whitley or Dr. Kreiper brought this up in the Supernatural, that at least some faction within the government think that these memes are dangerous in some way or another to like social order,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's why the denial and the disinformation happens because they're attempting to inoculate the population. I mean, you can even tie this into things like psychop and stuff. Like you're attempting to basically inoculate and vaccinate the population against the actualizing cultural memes that are spread through, an unknown mechanism via possibly through, intelligences that are external to us, but I can't confirm that either way.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what just occurred to me, and I'm trying to find the book name for mention here, but the another part of this that I find completely fascinating is the notion of the more educated, the more noted in your profession you are. Um, PhDs, pick your alphabet soup that goes after the name. Uh, the more established or recognized the person is in their professional life upon entering the UFO field, the ghost field, the paranormal in general, these people are the more likely ones to spin off the rails.
Mhm.
Which, again, I hate to keep referring back to Terrence McKenna because he's really not particularly a paranormal figure, but he makes sense when he says that the UFO phenomena essentially is a thumb of the nose at science. It tends to make an ass of science. When science says something can't be possible, it says, "Oh, really? Is that what you think?" Bam! Here's this. And I think it's Walter Prince wrote a book called The Enchanted Boundary, which talks about the more even in a business sense. And I might point out somebody like oh God, please help me because I suck at names. Multimillionaire. Um,
Elon Musk.
no. Oh God.
Are you talking about Bigelow?
Thank
Oh,
you.
Bigelow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's a guy who just said, absolutely positively extraterrestrial presence on Earth. He knows it for a fact. It's not guesswork. Um, Very well established, very intelligent man, smart business guy. But what had surprised me, um, if he went completely off the rails with his statements about this phenomena even further, no, it wouldn't. Um, when you talk about PhDs, I mean, look at um, a guy named Jim Deerdorf, doctor, professor for meteorology,
Mhm.
highly acclaimed meteorological figure in the way of academe. And yet when he comes into the paranormal, the Meyer case is his pet case.
Mhm.
I mean, and this is not just, select people. This is over and over and over in this field. And so I look at that and I go, so is that some kind of like, you don't know what you're talking about? Stop with the gravitas of your intelligence. You are not as smart as you think you are. These are all things, again, that are put forth by a psychedelic experience. There's always these things of, you don't really know that much, so let me lay this on you. That kind of sardonic, but yet helpful kind of attitude that phenomena seems to present. I mean, again, I don't know what that is, but it seems to be thumbing its nose at authority. It's saying, look what I can do to your established scientists.
Mhm.
Is that really literally what it is, or is that just something that we're picking out looking for order? I have no idea.
I mean, that's partially why the whole Burning Man festival scares the shit out of me, because it's all these multi-millionaire rich tech guys from Silicon Valley going out in the desert and doing psychedelics. And it's like, these are the last people in the world that need to be doing psychedelics.
Yeah.
Because what kind of terrible ideas are they going to get out of this? And that's sort of what I mean too about Bigelow when I mentioned, like, Bigelow is an example of the bourgeoisie. Like, he owns this mega corporation. He's multimillionaire. Do you think that he's ever had his own experience? I mean, I don't think he has. I
I
think
have
he's
no
just,
idea what he may or may not have experienced at Skinwalker Ranch. I have no idea.
I have very mixed feelings about Skinwalker, but I would hazard a guess, and I don't know this for sure. I don't know Robert Bigelow, but I would guess that he's probably never had his own experience. That he's
You're probably
building
right. Yeah.
off of all these experiences from other people, and he's looking at this data, and he's coming from it with a bias, and he's already made up his mind in terms of what he believes,
Oh, sure.
and so he's pulling out of that data what he wants to see.
Huh?
And then he's spreading that narrative to other people.
Well, without a doubt, when you talk to John Alexander, I mean, you can look him up on YouTube right now and look up Skinwalker. I mean, the man was there, and he said when you boil all of what Skinwalker Ranch showed us, you come out with the trickster. You come out with this self-conscious, entity of some kind that is, doing things to absolutely perplex and amaze, but yet what purpose, to what end, that sort of thing. And yet you don't hear any of that in Bigelow's statement to 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
That seems odd to me.
That's what I mean. That's the entire narrative of Final Events. I mean, bringing it back to the beginning of our conversation, like Final Events and Mac Tony's Cryptoterrestrials posit the idea that this phenomena is pulling the wool over our eyes, that it's putting forth these ideas, it's intentionally confusing people and muddying the waters. It's doing disinformation on itself because there is something that's going on behind the curtain.
Oh yeah.
That we are not aware of, and it's like a stage magician. It's just misdirection. You're chasing phantoms while you're getting pickpocketed.
Yeah, and as much as people say, I think Mike Cleland has mentioned that he thinks that a lot of the quote unquote abduction experiences that he's had may have been like he never left his bed. I think other people have been on the program saying much the same thing.
Right.
And that too kind of speaks to multi-leveled experience. Like you could talk about being in that field and seeing that craft, and the next thing you know, you don't know where you are, and this is happening, and you feel like this is happening, but there seems to always be something that's felt underneath the surface of experiences like that. And so when you hear people talk about these implantations and all of that, I mean, again, I don't say that narrative is particularly false. I don't look at that as the totality of the experience. I see that as a piece of it that's probably co-created by cultural contamination of one kind or another. But is something going on? Yes, something is going on, but it seems to be underlying that. Yeah. And there could be other things underlying all of these things. Like the experience itself is multi-layered and multi-tiered.
I mean, right. Well, like Mac Tony said, it's a laser pointer, and we're the cats chasing the laser pointer.
Exactly.
But we're not looking at who's holding the laser.
Yep.
So we are just about out of time. Any last thoughts on this, guys?
Yeah, just quit. I mean, get it. You're at a loss, man. Give it up now. Other than this has been a great discussion. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, same. I
Okay.
mean, I guess final thoughts would be, I think these things are still worthwhile to study, even if we are being misdirected. You know, there's always some truth sandwiched between all these lies, and I think if you're careful and you don't get caught in feedback loops, maybe you can pull something out, and maybe we can learn things a little bit at a time.
Yeah, look
And-
past
and-
the surface.
And I think that feedback loop thing is pretty much key. You gotta kind of stay agnostic. You gotta not put too much into it. You just kind of I don't know. The way I've always approached this is just, okay, that happened.
Mhm.
And I try not to identify what that is. Even when I saw a UFO, I didn't say that was some kind of spaceship or
Right.
whatever. It was just those were lights, and I can't explain what those were because it was just too much. But the minute you start thinking that was extraterrestrial, you've now created a dialogue that may take you in the wrong direction.
Mhm.
And maybe had I done that, I would have had different experiences following it, but nothing followed it that fit that sort of thing.
Just thinking about you setting the stage, and it's going to take the players on the stage. So that's really, that's how I kind of look at it these days. Whatever your thoughts are about it at the onset is how it's going to play itself.
Right. And it's very hard not to have some thoughts about it, especially
Yeah.
with our culture.
Yeah, it is.
Like
All right.
like Valet said, we need to look for the projector, not the pictures.
Exactly.
Yeah. Although the pictures are pretty interesting sometimes.
They are interesting.
We just got to realize that they're pictures. It's a film. All right. So thank you guys. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right. And you can find Jeff Ritzmann at the Numinous Den, and that's NUMINOUS Den, DEN, blogspot.com. If you want to find Wren, you can find him at Liminal Room, which is liminalroom.com, and that's LIMINAL room.com.